The dress arrived on a Thursday, which felt wrong somehow. Thursdays are for grocery runs and dentist appointments, and forgetting to call your mother back. Not for opening a garment box the size of a small coffin and finding your entire future folded inside tissue paper. I remember standing in the hallway of my apartment in Kitchener, still in my work clothes. Blazer, sensible flats, the kind of outfit that says I'm a competent person who has things under control, holding a card that read, Saturday, 11 a.m., wear this. No signature. Just the name of a hotel on King Street and those 4 words, as if showing up in the dress was the most natural thing in the world. The dress itself was, God, it was beautiful. Navy silk, structured at the shoulders, the kind of thing that costs more than my monthly rent, and makes you stand differently when you put it on. Like it expects something from you. I set it on the kitchen chair, and made tea I didn't drink, and told myself I was not going to cry. I cried a little. My name is Fenna Backer. I'm 29 years old. Was, a senior project coordinator at a mid-size construction firm in Waterloo region, the kind of job where you spend your days making sure other people's problems don't become disasters. I was good at it. I liked having systems. I liked knowing what came next. What came next in this case was Rowan Steele. I should explain my father first. He's a good man. That's the thing that makes it so complicated, because bad men are easier to be angry at. He's generous and funny, and he makes the best tourtière in Ontario, and he would do anything for the people he loves. He just also has a problem. Has had it, quietly, and then not so quietly, for the better part of 15 years. Sports betting at first, then poker, then whatever was available at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, when the feeling got too loud to ignore. My mother left when I was 22. Not cruelly. She just got tired of waiting for something to change that wasn't going to change. I understood it more than I wanted to. I stayed. Not because I was obligated to. Because he's my dad, and I know the difference between the man and the illness, even if some days that line gets blurry. The debt, the one that matters to this story, was to a development company called Clearwater Holdings. Dad had done some contract work for them back in 2019. Residential builds up near Collingwood. Normal stuff. But then he'd borrowed against projected earnings that didn't come in, and then borrowed again, and then made some arrangement I still don't fully understand involving a property in Simcoe County that was never legally his to offer. By the time I found out, the number had 7 digits. The man he owed it to was Rowan Steele. I'd heard the name before I ever met him. In business circles in the region, you hear it the way you hear about weather, not always relevant to your life, but worth knowing what direction it's moving. Clearwater Holdings was his. So was a private equity firm out of Toronto, 3 commercial properties along the Humber, and a reputation for being the kind of man who finished what he started, one way or another. Dad brought me to the meeting like I was his lawyer. I think he needed someone to witness it. Or maybe he just couldn't face it alone. The office was on the 42nd floor of a building on Bay Street, the kind of space designed to make you feel like you've already lost before you open your mouth. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Lake Ontario flat and gray in the distance. A woman at reception who looked at us like she'd catalogued our net worth before we'd finished signing in. Rowan Steele kept us waiting 11 minutes. I know because I counted. When he came in, he wasn't what I expected. I'd built him up as someone older, more obviously menacing. The kind of man who fills a room by taking up too much of it. He was tall, yes, broad-shouldered in a gray suit that fit like it had been designed specifically for him, which it probably had, dark hair, a jaw that looked like a structural decision. But what I noticed first was that he was calm, completely, deliberately calm, like a room-temperature lake right before a storm you can't see yet. He sat down across from us, and he looked at my father, and then he looked at me, and I don't know how to explain what happened in those 3 seconds except to say that it felt like being assessed and found. Not wanting, just found. Like he was noting something down somewhere I couldn't see. "Mr. Backer," he said, "I appreciate you coming in." His voice was low. He was from somewhere east of here. New Brunswick, I'd learn later, and there was something in the cadence of his speech that was unhurried in a way that felt like a choice. Dad said something about wanting to work out a payment structure. Rowan listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't check his phone, didn't do any of the things people do when they're waiting for you to finish talking. He just listened. Then he said, "I have a different proposal." That was when he looked at me again. The proposal was objectively insane. I want to be clear about that because I've had people, friends, my cousin Liesel, my therapist, eventually, tell me that I should have walked out of that room. And they're right. The correct response to a man suggesting that your companionship over a period of 6 months would constitute adequate settlement of a 7-figure debt was to stand up, say absolutely not, and consult an actual lawyer. I didn't walk out. Here's what he said, exactly, because I wrote it down afterward in my phone while I sat in the elevator going back down to the lobby. I'm not asking for anything that makes you uncomfortable. I'm asking you to attend events, be present at certain dinners, and sign a contract that protects you legally at every stage. At the end of 6 months, your father's debt is cleared. Completely, he had a contract ready, which told me he'd known, before we walked in, what he was going to offer. Which told me he'd looked into us, into me. I should have been angry. I was angry. I was also, and I hate admitting this, curious in a way that felt dangerous, the way you lean a little too far over a railing just to see how it feels. I signed on the 3rd day. I told myself it was practical. I told myself 6 months was nothing, that I had managed worse things with less support, that the number on my father's debt would follow him for the rest of his life, and I had the option to make it disappear. And wasn't that just math, when you broke it down? I didn't let myself think about why Rowan Steele wanted me specifically. That question was too large to look at directly. The first event was a charity gala at the ROM, the Royal Ontario Museum, for anyone outside the province. A fundraiser for an Indigenous land conservation initiative that I'd actually heard of and vaguely supported, which made the whole thing more disorienting. It's easier to feel like you're being transactional when the context is something you don't care about. He picked me up in a black car I didn't know what to call. His assistant had sent my dress 3 days prior. Different one. Emerald green. He said when I got in, "You look well." "Thank you," I said. 40 minutes of mostly silence and the Toronto skyline and the distant sound of the 427. At the event, he introduced me to people whose names I recognized from business sections of the Globe and Mail as Fenna. Never my colleague or a friend or anything that categorized me. Just my name, as if I were something self-evident. I talked to a woman named Haruki, who ran a soil remediation company in Manitoba, and had opinions about federal carbon pricing that I found genuinely interesting. I ate 2 of the small tuna things. I watched Rowan across the room have a conversation that looked, from the outside, like 2 people discussing something very boring, but his expression had shifted in a way I couldn't quite name. Sharper, more careful. In the car on the way back, he said, "You were good in there." "I work with people for a living," I said. "It's not a performance." He looked at me. "I know," he said. That's what I meant. I didn't know what to do with that, so I looked out the window until we got to Kitchener. The weeks moved the way weeks do when you're waiting for something to clarify. Dinners, mostly. A weekend in Niagara-on-the-Lake for a wine industry event that I had opinions about because my firm had done some residential work in the region, and I knew more about the local drainage problems than was probably appropriate for a social occasion. I mentioned one of them, casually I thought, and Rowan turned toward me with an expression I hadn't seen from him yet. Something openly interested, almost surprised. "How do you know about the flooding on Line 9? He said. "We rerouted a foundation project 2 summers ago because of it," I said. The previous contractors had ignored the soil reports. He was quiet for a moment. "That's my brother-in-law's vineyard." "Oof," I said. "The contractors he used before me," he said, "were the ones who ignored the soil reports." There was a beat, and then, for the first time, he laughed. Not politely, not socially, but actually laughed, and it changed his whole face into something I wasn't prepared for. I looked away. I looked at the vines. "Do you go by Fenna?" Or, I said, "My grandmother's name." He said it quietly, like he was placing it somewhere. "Fenna?" That was the first time my own name felt like something I hadn't heard before. I called my friend Desmond from my car in a mall parking lot in Guelph 3 weeks into the arrangement and said, "I think I might be developing feelings for a man who bought access to my time as a debt settlement, and I need you to tell me I'm being an idiot." Desmond, who has known me since university and has watched me make several large life decisions from a position of extreme pragmatism, said, "Tell me about him. That's not what I asked you to say. Tell me about him, Fen." I told him about the laughing. I told him about the way Rowan listened, not waiting for his turn, but actually listening, tracking the conversation, remembering things I'd said 2 dinners ago, and referencing them in ways that seemed accidental but weren't. I told him about the time Rowan had been 40 minutes late to a dinner in Toronto because there'd been some kind of situation at one of his properties, and he'd texted me, not his assistant, him, to say he was sorry, and that was such a small thing, but I kept thinking about it. Fen, Desmond said. I know. Does he know you have feelings for him? No, absolutely not. We have a contract, right, he said, and I could hear him choosing his next words very carefully. And how's your dad? He's at a meeting, I said. Tuesday and Thursday nights now, he got a sponsor. That's good. Yeah, so, Desmond said gently, the original reason for all of this is improving. I put my forehead on the steering wheel. Don't. I'm just noting that you could at some point have a conversation about. I'm not having a conversation about anything, I said. I'm going to complete the 6 months and extract myself, and that's that. Desmond made a sound that communicated, without any words at all, that he thought I was lying to myself. He's been doing that since we were 19. I've never managed to resent him for it. The moment of the dress, the one that I can't tell this story without arriving at, eventually, happened at 4 months and 9 days. Rowan's firm was hosting a quarterly stakeholder event at a hotel in downtown Toronto, the kind of evening that exists to remind everyone in a room that they are all, in some way, connected. I was running late because of a project delay in Cambridge that I'd been managing from my laptop in my car, and I arrived at the hotel with 20 minutes to change. The garment bag was waiting in the room that had been reserved. I unzipped it without reading the note attached. The dress inside was cream silk charmeuse. Not white, not quite ivory, this particular shade that's almost the color of winter light, through curtains, with a structured bodice and a skirt that moved like something organic. It was the most beautiful thing I had owned, temporarily, which felt like its own category of grief. I put it on. It fit exactly, which by that point wasn't surprising. His assistant had been meticulous about every garment, but still felt like something. I stood in front of the mirror, and I thought about my grandmother, whose name I carried. I thought about my father sitting in a church basement on a Tuesday night. I thought about the number on a contract that was 4 months from clearing, and then I picked up the note on the dresser. In handwriting I recognized now as Rowan's, neat, small, left-leaning, the handwriting of someone who was taught to do things carefully. It said, I thought this suited you, not the event, just you. I stood there for a long time. Then I went downstairs. He was in the lobby talking to 2 men in suits when I came out of the elevator. I know, because I saw him before he saw me, and I had a few seconds to watch his face in its natural state, focused, professionally warm, holding a glass of something sparkling he wasn't drinking. The kind of man who is always working even when the work is invisible. Then someone shifted and he saw me. I don't know what my face did. I'd like to think it did nothing. But I know what his face did, and it did the thing I'd been carefully not looking, for 4 months, it stopped. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone paying attention to something else. But I was paying attention. I was, by that point, paying more attention to Rowan Steele's face than I had paid to most things in my adult life, and I watched him go very still for exactly 2 seconds before he recovered. I walked over. I said, because I needed to say something and my brain produced this. Does it work? For the event, I mean. He looked at me for a moment that was about 3 times longer than it needed to be. Yes, he said. Okay. I said, Fenna, he said. I waited. You look. He stopped. He did that thing where he was choosing words like he had too many and not enough at the same time. You look like yourself, that's all. Just yourself. It was not the most romantic sentence ever constructed, but I felt it somewhere between my sternum and my spine, and I spent the entire event trying not to let it show. 3 weeks before the 6 months ended, Rowan asked me to stay after a dinner in Yorkville. The restaurant had mostly cleared out. There was a couple near the window who weren't talking, and a server refilling water glasses with the focus of someone who needed to be somewhere else. I want to talk about what happens after the contract ends, he said. Okay, I said. The original terms were clear, he said. I want to be clear that I intend to honor them completely. Your father's debt will be cleared. The documentation is already prepared. I know, I said. Thank you. He looked at his glass. I also want to be clear about something that wasn't in the contract. I didn't say anything. I didn't when I proposed this arrangement. I wasn't operating in good faith, and I want to acknowledge that. I knew who you were before your father came to my office. I had read about the work your firm had done. I'd seen you once, at an industry event in Hamilton about a year before. I told myself I was being practical, that it was an efficient solution to a problem. The couple near the window had started talking. Something low, unintelligible. Rowan, I said. I'm not asking you for anything, he said quickly. I want to be clear, I'm not using the arrangement as leverage. I think I owe you honesty about the fact that this was never entirely about the contract on my end, and that you deserve to know that, and that whatever you decide after Saturday is completely and entirely yours. There was a long silence. You saw me at a trade show, I said. Infrastructure conference, he said. You were arguing with someone about thermal bridging. I remember that argument, I said. I was right. You were absolutely right, he said. I read the white paper you referenced afterward. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had upended 6 months of my life and kept me from sleeping, and who remembered the name of an obscure technical paper about building envelope performance. You could have just asked me to dinner, I said, like a normal person. Something shifted in his expression. Would you have said yes? I thought about it honestly. A man I didn't know, different world, titanium walls, he kept around everything personal. Probably not, I admitted. No, he agreed, that still doesn't make it okay. I know, he said. I'm not trying to make it okay. I picked up my glass. I set it down. I need to think, I said. Of course, he said. The server came and asked if we needed anything. We both said no, and then we sat in the quiet for another few minutes. Before I put on my coat and he walked me to the street. And we stood there on Yorkville Avenue with the October air coming down from the north, and he put me in a car without touching me, without asking for anything, without saying anything except my name once, quietly, in a way that I took home and kept. I thought for about 2 weeks. I talked to Desmond, who said I told you so with the restraint of a man who loves you. I talked to my therapist, who asked the right questions and made me answer them honestly, which was as uncomfortable and useful. I called my mother, which surprised us both, and she said, Fenna, you've been managing everyone else's life since you were 22. What does the one where you get to be a little impractical look like? I talked to my father. That was the hardest one. Not because he was unhelpful, but because he started crying before I was finished, and he said, I know what I cost you. I've known since the day you signed that thing. If you want nothing to do with him, that's the right answer. If you don't, Fen, you've earned the right to want things for yourself. He was at a meeting 2 nights later, and the night after that. I drove to Toronto on a Saturday morning, with Desmond in the passenger seat eating a drive-through hash brown, and refusing to give me directions I hadn't asked for. The building on Bay Street looked different in the morning light, less monolithic, more like just a building. I signed in at reception, the same woman as before. She looked like she was cataloging my net worth again. I let her. Rowan's assistant came down to meet me, which meant Rowan knew I was there, which meant someone had called ahead, which meant some part of me had already made the decision while the thinking was still happening. The assistant, a young man named Graham, whose efficiency I had come to deeply respect over 6 months, said simply, He's been in since 6. He'll be glad you came. The elevator was the same. 42 floors, the same view. Lake Ontario in the distance, flat now in November gray. Rowan was standing at the window when I walked in. He turned around. He looked like he hadn't slept particularly well. He looked like he was waiting for something he wasn't sure he was going to get. He looked for the first time since I'd known him, like a person who didn't quite have a plan. Hi, I said. Hi, he said. I thought about it, I said. He waited. I think you made a terrible decision, I said, in that office, and I think it came from a real place, which makes it more complicated, not less. And I think we'd have to actually talk about that, really talk, not just adjacent to it. Yes, he said, and I think you should know that I'm not. I am not someone who is easy. I have opinions about building codes, and I worry about my dad, and I call Desmond from parking lots, and I have never once in my life made a decision that was purely about what I wanted, and I'm not sure I know how to start. I know, he said. You don't know, I said. 3 business dinners and a wine event and 4 months of someone trying to behave themselves. And the infrastructure conference, he said. And the white paper. And the way you talked to Haruki at the ROM like you'd known her for years. And the fact that you made a decision for your father that most people wouldn't have had the courage to make. I stood there. I'd like to learn the rest, he said. If you'll let me. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a speech. It was just a man standing in front of a window in the November light telling me something that was true. Okay, I said. But you're buying me coffee first, a real one. Not, I gestured vaguely at the carafe on his desk, whatever that is. Something happened in his expression then. Not just the laugh, though there was that too, but something softer underneath it, something that looked a lot like relief. There's a place downstairs, he said. The oat milk one you like. I noticed. I looked at him. Of course he had noticed. Of course he had been paying attention in all the places I'd been trying not to notice him paying attention. Rowan, I said. Yeah, don't make me regret this. He held the door open. I won't, he said. And then, quietly, in that unhurried voice that I had spent 4 months trying to feel nothing about. Fen. It was the first time he'd used it. I walked through the door.